What's going on, everybody? My name is Jerome, and welcome to Influencers Impact. Before we go any further, I just want to thank you guys so much for subscribing to this channel, for being a part of this journey. If either you've been with me from the very beginning or for the first time, welcome. I love you guys and thank you. It really means a lot. You can also feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any new and upcoming videos. Now, in the next few seconds, we're going to be having an interview with Kellie Gamble, singer and songwriter from Bridge Worship. Get ready, it's going to be a great interview. At this time, I just want to give a purpose shout out to someone who I feel has made a huge impact on my life in the past couple weeks. His name is Johansson Obanda. He commented on my Instagram account, which you can find linked in the description below. Comes all the way from Kenya, and the fact that he watched my video and the words that he said encouraged me so much. I just wanted to give him that shout out and let you guys know that if you feel free to follow me on Instagram, you might get a shout out as well in one of my next and upcoming videos. All right, guys, now it's time to get into that interview. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this video. Hello, hello.
Hey, Jerome, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm so good. It's good to meet you, I
Yeah,
guess.
likewise. I appreciate you being able to be flexible for us to switch this from last
Oh
week.
my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. If there's nothing else I've learned in this season, it's flexibility is key.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining me and for being a part of this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it, especially taking out the time. You're probably busy and have a lot of things. But I just kind of like wanted to talk about just a few things like songwriting and music and worship and how that kind of comes together with who you are. But first off, if I can, where are you from and what do you do?
Yes. Okay, so I'm originally from Minnesota, a small town. Well, it's not super small, but it's a town south of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And I was born and raised there. Moved to Tennessee when I was 18 to go to college, and now to Nashville, and I've lived there ever since. So that's
wow.
been almost 9 years, something like that now, which is crazy that it's been that long. But yeah, I'm a Northerner at heart. But yeah, I'm from Tennessee. And what do? I work at a church in, technically it's in Spring Hill, which is just south of Nashville, kind of like in the metro area. And I'm a worship leader.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, how has that changed for you, your role as a worship leader during this time of COVID and everything that's been going on?
Yes, it's been an adventure for sure. It has, gosh, it's looked like so many different things, and it feels like so long ago that COVID started. It was only a few months by now, but obviously everything that we're doing is online now, or has been. So that we went from, so we have 2 physical locations with multiple services at each one, and then adult gatherings, student gatherings, and kids gatherings on Sundays. So that's a lot of different environments. So we went from having like all of those different worship experiences to having one.
Wow.
So my job looked a lot like helping just organize volunteers, going from like a lot of different serving opportunities for volunteers down to like one team each week, how to safely record worship each week with everybody, and like how to create an online worship experience that feels somewhat normal for someone who's in their home, like watching on their computer, their TV, or their phone. So it's been a lot of like creative problem solving, which has honestly been really fun. I like that kind of stuff, like, you know, when changing things up and you have to like figure out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's true.
That's been fun. And we just started this past week. We are not like, our building is not open again officially yet, but we just started doing what we're calling pop-up sites. So we have like basically little gatherings around town of like 30 people. So basically just sending like 1 or 2 of our worship leaders to each one of those sites to just lead like acoustic worship. So that's kind of like what it's progressed to now that we're like slowly starting to reopen some things. So it's been a lot of, I guess, like organization
of course
and things.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand that. Now, you said you grew up in Minnesota. Now
Mhm.
you're in Tennessee. At that time frame of your life, did you always want to, or did you always see yourself being a worship leader?
Like when I moved.
Yeah, yeah. When you moved, like, did you think, hey, this is my plan, this is what I want to do, or did it just kind of happen, I guess?
Kind of both, honestly. Like I didn't when I moved, I've been a worship leader for a long time. Like I started leading worship in high school, like
Oh,
in my
okay.
so that was just it's something I did and was familiar with and comfortable with. And when I moved to Tennessee, my major in college was music business.
Okay.
And I switched it after my freshman year to a religion degree. And like not I didn't really even have a career in mind when I did that, which sounds weird, but I was just like, you know what, instead of studying like economics and accounting, I,
Hmm.
I love studying the Bible and like just the church. So
Right.
I switched my major not with the intent of like I want to work at a church one day, but just with the intent of this is what I enjoy studying.
That's awesome.
So I kind of like I always and I led worship. I've led worship through most every season of my life, so it's always just been a part of my life. So when this job kind of put itself in front of me, it just
Yeah.
kind of made sense. But it wasn't necessarily something I was like actively seeking out.
Right.
But you know how God works. It's just like it's like a both and a lot of times.
Yeah, that's true. And you never really realize what's going to happen 10
Mhm.
days from now or 10 weeks literally.
Yeah.
And you find yourself meeting somebody, having a conversation, and then a year from now, God's like, hey, remember that conversation that you had?
Exactly.
It's going to
Yeah.
happen this time
Like
for real.
literally the guy who hired me, I met like in my first month of college. We went to
Mm,
college together and he led a worship night on campus and then ended up like years later hiring me for this job. So it was
wow.
exactly one of those moments where it just kind of came full circle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you work at the Bridge Church, right?
Yes.
So I did go on your social media to see, and this is super cool. I want to see if we can talk about these three different areas where you serve, I guess,
All right.
because I find when we serve, it's not just when we serve a church. We serve God with all of our gifts and all of our talents that He's given us.
Yeah.
So you're part of the worship team with
Mhm.
Bridge Worship.
Yeah.
And then I've noticed that you are also, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you part of a group, another group? It's Ex Nihilo. Did I say that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you did. Uh-huh.
Okay. Now, so there's those two, and then there's a song that you just came out with. I want to talk about after, and it's under your own like name as an artist. So you're serving in three different like areas, if
Mhm.
I can ask that.
Yeah.
How does that work for you? Like, how have you found that in your journey
Yes.
of life?
Um, gosh, where to begin? Okay, so for bridge worship, I'll talk about that first.
Yeah.
Bridge worship is kind of like we call it the missional arm of like our worship team
Mm-hmm.
and our worship ministry at the bridge. So basically we have like our worship team and our volunteers that serve every week and like make it happen on Sundays,
Yeah.
Wednesdays for students. But we started we have a lot of songwriters in our community. That's also partly to do with just living and being so close to Nashville.
Yeah,
They're
that's true.
everywhere here. But even just being a part of like a local church, I think that's something that we've discovered is so like just writing songs and songs that are about what God's doing in our own community, like just
Yeah.
in our own little spot. Because you have songs that are there's so many worship songs out there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really special, I think, to be able to put words to what God's doing in your own personal context as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what like the bridge worship is birthed out of. And then so we've been writing songs for bridge worship intentionally for the past few years now, 2 or 3 years now.
Wow.
So that's been just really fun to be a part of as a songwriter. Like it's an honor to write songs for my
Mm-hmm.
church, and to see them come to life is really really cool. So that is bridge worship in a tiny nutshell.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
um,
fine.
and then Ex Nihilo is completely separate in a way. Like that is a project that my husband and I actually started with some of our friends,
Mm-hmm.
just as like a different creative outlet, essentially.
Okay.
With worship kind of at its core, but kind of with the mindset of like, okay, sometimes there's just things that we have to process, and like things that we're living and we want to write about, want to sing about, that might necessarily, you might not necessarily sing about them in like a corporate worship context, like walking to church on a Sunday, but they're still like relevant to our experience as Christians. So that is like the heartbeat behind that project. And that one's really fun because it's just kind of like whatever we want to do, like there's not really any boundaries to it. And then my own project, Kellie Besch Music, is something that I started releasing music under, 4 years ago, purely out of just, I was at the time, this was before I started working at the church, I was kind of just a freelance musician in town. I was playing keys for artists and singing background vocals for artists and writing a lot. And so some of my really good friends who are like, who know, the kind of friends who like know me and like know how to push me in the right direction, they're like, why aren't you, like, you have all this music that you're writing, why aren't you releasing it? And I was like, I've never wanted to be like an artist necessarily, of like, I want to tour the world and like sell a ton of records and stuff, like that's just, I don't know, it's fun to do, but that's not like my end goal. So I started working on that project just out of like, I'm just gonna do it because I feel like I should, and feel like I have songs that I want to just get out into the world. So that one is like a different vein entirely, of just pretty much just for my own enjoyment. So I hadn't released music under that name, under that project, since 2017. I just finished up a song in quarantine now that I had the time to finish it, and just released it. So that
song, We Gonna Be Okay, you wrote that during quarantine?
I actually did not write it during quarantine. I wrote it 3 years ago. Yeah, crazy story, because I wrote it 3 years ago with a couple of friends. And at the time, it was wild because there had just been another tragic murder of a Black man by a police officer. And so the headlines were full of that, and I was having a really hard time processing it. And so that song was like my processing of that moment. And so it's always like had a really special place in my heart, because it was so, it was just a special song to. So when quarantine came around, we were kind of like, well, we have this song. Like, I've always really believed in it. And there's been a few moments throughout the past few years where like tragic things have happened again. And it's like, oh, this would be a great song to release. It's full of hope. And then quarantine happened, and we were like, it's a pandemic. Like, if any time to release this song, it's probably now. And then George Floyd, like that whole thing happened. We had already like finished the song, and we had submitted it for distribution, so it was like coming out, whether like at that point there's no control. And then all of that happened, and it was just wild that the same type of events had shown up back in our. It was really weird. It was like one of those things that I was just like, I couldn't have planned that if I tried, and I didn't want to have something like that happen again. But
the reason why I asked, because I didn't want, like, I listened to that song quite the last few weeks. I listened to it today, and right away I'm like, I wonder if she wrote it because of what happened. And I'm like, maybe not. And then I'm like, maybe it had to do with the pandemic. Maybe not. So it really goes to say, like, whenever God puts something in our mind or in our heart, we have no idea when or why he wants to use it. But I think from what I'm hearing, from what you're saying, we just have to be obedient and do it anyways. And just like you said, it could be 3 years that God is putting something inside of us that will be birthed later on. But I think it goes to show that we just have to be willing to be obedient. If that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes, that's hitting it right on the head for sure.
No, definitely. Now, I heard a little bit based on what you were sharing, like when you're going through something or something's going around you, writing music is kind of your way of expressing. What does your like creative process then look like with songwriting? Like how does that look? Because I know for people it's different.
It's different for me based on the situation, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and who I'm writing with too.
Right.
So I know some people are like, I always come up with the melody first and then everything, or I always come up with the song title first. And
Yeah.
for me, it looks different every time. So like, oftentimes, I would say the most often, it's like the random moments where I'm like driving in my car, like driving home from work, and
Yeah.
some like a line or something will just come to me, and I try to like write those down or like put them in a voice memo and hold on to them for later,
Oh wow.
because those can be like a good starting point for when I get into a co-write and I'm with some people and we're like, what should we write about? Those can be helpful to like go back through and be like, oh, I had this idea like whenever it was.
Yeah.
Maybe we can like use this as a launching point and like build off of it. But sometimes I write with people. It kind of depends on who you're writing for too. Like sometimes if you're co-writing, you'll get in a room with someone who's like the reason you're writing with them is because they're working on a project that they need songs for, or you could be like writing for a different church, or when we write for Bridge Worship, like we're writing for our church. So it's like, I think good writers have the ability to like get in, like take a step into somebody else's life. But then there's moments, you know, too, where like, especially when we're writing, I would say for Bridge Worship, it's usually like several of us who are all part of the team. So we are all experiencing whatever God's doing currently together. So we can all kind of like bring our perspectives to it. I don't know if this is answering the question in a helpful way at all. Basically, it just always looks different. Sometimes you like have all the words and like you need help putting the melody to it and the music to it. Sometimes like a producer will have like a really awesome beat or chord progression that the rest of the song kind of comes out of. So it basically just always looks different. I really like writing I love writing with other people. It's harder sometimes when I'm writing like for Kellie Besch, like for my own personal stuff. That's usually music that has started with just me, and then maybe I bring someone else in to finish it. But sometimes it's easier for me to write with that by myself, just because it is almost like it's like a journaling type of thing. Like songwriting is for me sometimes. But for the other projects, it's like so fun to collaborate with other people.
And based on what I just heard you say, you touched on something so profound, is collaboration when it comes to creating. Because I find you can't really create things without collaborating with people the way that God wants it to be. Because I can write a song by myself, and then I can be selfish right away if someone else wants to come in because they're like, hey, let's change it. But because I wrote it, I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. The way God works is he created us. I always say God created us to create. And that we should be willing to work with other people, to work together. And you said something that I've actually never heard anyone say, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually really good. You touched on how sometimes you might write songs for another church. A lot of times I'll talk to people, like some of my friends who want to work on music or write or be a worship leader. And I'll always bring up the idea, well, would you, if a church needed help, would you lead worship for them? I'm like, oh, no, I would never. And I'm like, why? Well, that's not my church. I'm like, but the church is not a building. It's a corporate body. It's the body of Christ. And if we're not willing to collaborate with other people, then are you writing for God or are you writing for yourself? So like what you said right there is huge. Like sometimes God will say, write for yourself, write for your church that you're at, the building, or write for another church or someone else. And I think sometimes people forget to, like, there's artists out there, so many. And I'm going to ask you about who are some artists that you relate to in a second, but there's so many artists out there that sing certain songs, but they didn't write it. Someone else did. And that's just how it is. But for you personally, Kellie, who are some artists that you kind of relate to that have, I guess, influenced your life?
Oh, that is such a hard question. There's so many. Okay, so I think historically, like super foundationally for me, my dad raised me on like classic rock, and my mom always listened to like 80s pop. So, and I'm from Minnesota, so Prince has been one of my biggest inspirations for a long, long time. just in general, he hits like just there's so many things about him.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of pop. I think I have probably gosh, I'm even trying to narrow it down into like category. I was gonna say I think I have a lot of like pop music influences and worship influences, but even like there's so many outside of that. But I love. I was also so I also played classical piano growing up. That's like my background in music itself. So there's composers that were really influential for me. Debussy and Ravel are two composers that I like still go back to, and which I know sounds weird, like I don't write classical music or anything like that, but they had a huge influence on me. For pop, I think Kimbra is one of my all-time favorite artists. She's super influential to me, and there's a band called well, I guess they're not really pop, they're more R&B kind of experimental, but there's another band called Hiatus Coyote from Australia that's really I've been a huge fan of theirs ever since I discovered them. And the reason I love them so much, their lead singer is this woman who is an incredible songwriter, and she said something about songwriting in a masterclass that I watched on YouTube that she did. And it stuck with me for a long time. She said, her name's Napalm. She said, when you're writing, don't ask yourself like what you think people want to hear, because you're selling yourself short if you do that. And what people really want is to be surprised. So that quote has like been super influential to me, and I think it applies to a lot of other areas, not just writing music. But I could go on and on about this question, but I'll try to wrap it up. For worship, Kim Walker has been very, very influential to me. I found out about her when I was like right when I was moving to Nashville. So her music and Jesus culture like carried me through that season in a really profound way. Gosh, there's so much. There is also a woman who lives in Nashville. She's a pop artist / worship leader that's been really influential to me as well. Probably not as big of a name, but her name's Danielle Mason.
Okay.
And she has taught me a lot, just like watching her career. She's taught me a lot about being a worship leader and like being in the marketplace of music as well, and like being a pop artist, and that balancing those two things. I guess too, Brooke Fraser is like super one of my all-time favorites as well. So I could list off, I could literally go on for so long about this question, but those are some of the big ones.
No, that's awesome. And I like how there's different genres and different areas that touch on, because then it helps not only influence you, but it kind of helps you when you write. You can say it, I get this from here, or this piece from that. So I find that really cool. Now, during this time, not just with the pandemic, but even with what's been going on in the world, and you know, I won't touch on that because that's a different story for a different time. But how has your relationship with God grown through what's been going on for like you and your husband, or for you personally?
Yes, golly, trust has been huge for me, and a huge thing that I've had to like relearn kind of in this season. I am like a pretty go with the flow person, and like I'm not easily rattled. So it surprises me when I do get rattled, or when I do get like I like sneaks up on me. And it's usually when there's like something that's happening that's out of my control. And I don't realize how much I'm like grasping to regain that control. So with the pandemic, there was just so much. I mean, everything was up in the air. Like, not only could I get sick potentially, but also, is my job okay? Is my family's job okay? Is my family gonna get sick? Like, is everyone okay alone in their houses? Right? Like, all these things are running through my mind, and just I would get anxious about it. If I like dwelled on all of this worries. So trusting God that He had a plan in it, and that even like things that I had planned that were now like those plans are out the window because I can't leave my house. Trusting that He still has a plan in that, and trusting that He is using such a terrible thing for His glory, because that's what He does. He works all things for His good. So that's been really huge. Also rest. That's been another really big one.
Mm.
Rest has been huge because I like to just go, and I realized that I was kind of slipping into this place where I was equating my success with how productive I was or how much I was doing.
Wow.
So if I didn't have anything to do, or if I like, you know, hit a point in my day where I was like, okay, I completed my to-do list. Now what?
Mhm.
It was like very hard for me to turn off and just be like, I can just chill. Like,
Yeah.
let me just take a minute and like not do anything. And that's fine to like recharge and just rest and truly rest.
Yeah.
Those were two really big things for me. There's a lot, but those are probably the big
Yeah.
overall overarching themes.
And I think those things are what a lot of us should not be feeling, but I think a lot of us are probably dealing with is definitely the trust factor of, okay, God, we've trusted you all the way up into this point of our life. Now we hit a pandemic, something maybe we've never all experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Are we still going to trust him when life is good, as well as are we going to trust God when life gets a little rocky?
Yeah.
And I like what you said with like rest and knowing that sometimes, and I made that mistake too, where I think many people have, if you're a creative or an artist or a pastor, I think we've all made the mistake of, if I'm not producing enough, then I'm not succeeding.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing a lot, then I'm succeeding even more. And a lot of times we can produce a lot of things, like write a lot of music in that sense, that's probably not good. It's just we wrote it, but it might not go anywhere.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but it just shows that we can't always base our success off the work we do. It's a lot of times our success can be based, obviously supposed to come from Christ and be based on that, but even resting, I think, is a sense of success, because a lot of times we forget that God created the Sabbath and he created a time for us to rest. And I find I've been telling people, I'm like, if you're not resting in this season right now, you have no excuse, because a lot of people, obviously, unfortunately, are losing their jobs.
Yeah.
But then those that are still getting income are being forced to work at home.
Yeah.
Parents are being able to stay with their kids. Kids now are at home. So there's that family dynamic that can grow. But then there's still those people who are like, hey, I wish I had more time. I'm like, how much more time do you need? Like, I think right now, the church really should take this time to say, all right, God, what are you doing? And when this gets back to some type of normal, what can the church birth out of this? To kind of say that, hey, we stood strong, we didn't break down. Just because things got crazy doesn't mean that the church has to divide and be scarce. So, yeah, I think those two things are important: trust and rest, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say? One of, I guess, last question. What would you say to someone who is probably watching this either now or later on, and they want to be a songwriter, but they just don't know where to start or how to come about it? Like, what would you say to that person?
Just write. That's like the immediate easiest advice I can give, is to just write. And like, it doesn't have to be songs. Like, journal, write poems, write whatever, a book, I don't know, like just write something, a tweet, like whatever it is, just write something as often as you can. If you can do it as consistently as every day, I think there's so much to be said about just building that rhythm in your life, because I think it's Stephen King who does this or did this. Like, there's a lot of creative people throughout history who have like dedicated like a 9 to 5 essentially. Like, I'm gonna, even if my job is something that's creative in nature and I'm not like going into an office, like I work for myself, whatever it is, like creating specific boundaries in your day-to-day life where you're sitting down with the intention of being creative and producing something creative. Just because I think a lot of people live by the, oh, whenever inspiration strikes, like that's when I'll write type of mentality. And I think inspiration will strike more often if you're in a consistent rhythm of just doing it. And then also, like, I've gone through like seasons of really bad writer's block where I like couldn't write anything. And the best thing for me to do was to keep trying in that season. Like, if I felt like I couldn't write anything, to just keep doing the discipline of like sitting down to write something, even if it was bad. So definitely just doing it and building that habit is essential. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, if you're a songwriter, you can totally get by without, this is a very practical piece of advice. If you can totally get by without knowing anything about music theory, but it will help you so much if you can learn. If you don't already know anything about music theory, it will help you so much just to like know that and have that as a tool in your tool belt. Okay, and then one more thing I'll say is, especially if you're writing for the church, if you're writing worship music, just spend time with God and spend time in the Word, because whatever you're writing will be an overflow of what you're putting in. So if you're like spending time with God, and if you are consuming a lot of the Word and spending a lot of time studying it, that'll be what comes out. So that's, and that I feel like is even, I've had moments in writing songs where I feel like what I said was not me, like it was the Holy Spirit. So that's also just giving the Holy Spirit more tools in you for like him to use.
That's true. That's so true. Well, thank you for sharing that. That definitely touched me and blessed me, and I hope it blesses other people as well. Because, like, just like you said, if we're spending time in God's Word, the way we live our life, what we do, that will show. The fruits will show.
Yeah.
But if we try to do things on our own and we don't allow the Holy Spirit to speak to us, or we don't let God speak to us, a lot of it's going to be us and the flesh, and not a lot of things being produced from Christ. Last question I guess I'll ask is, what's next for you in any sense? You don't have to share everything, but like what's next for Kellie?
Oh man, great question. I don't know. Every day is different, it feels like, in this season, and everything can change so quickly. But I think I'll go back to for Kellie Besch music, that's been a really good creative outlet and a way for me to rest in a sense, even though it's still like producing something. It's different than, it's just a different type of, it's rejuvenating for me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So hopefully working on some more of that stuff. But also getting some more bridge worship stuff ready. We're about to put out a project that we've been working on. We've dropped a few singles over the past few months, and the EP is coming out in July. So that's super exciting, just getting ready for that. And then that is an exciting time, like, to be finishing a project, because people get to finally hear what like we've been working so hard on, but also it kind of starts the writing like season over for us of, okay, what are we going to do next? Like, what have we got in our arsenal? So more writing, which is always exciting. And you can write also, like, this season has proven that you can write anytime, anywhere, whether it's through Zoom or whatever, like, that doesn't have to stop. So
that's so true. Well, Kellie, I appreciate again you taking the time out of your day to do this. This has been a blessing to me, and I really hope it's been a blessing to everyone else that gets to watch this. But I do want to let you know we're praying for you and praying for your family, and hoping that all goes well for the church, and that you guys don't get to lose your job or anything like that. And definitely excited to see what comes from all the areas of life where you create and write songs. So we're definitely excited for that.
Thank you so much, Jerome. This was a blessing to me as well to be part of it. So thank you so much for all you're doing.
I appreciate it. Anytime, just let me know. But thanks again, Kellie, and have an amazing day.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right. Bye now.
See you later.